On today's episode of Future Says, we have Laura Chace, President and CEO of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Laura, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and about ITS America.
Sure. Well, I'll first start with ITS America. So we are a national trade association. We were actually founded in the 1990s by the U.S. Department of Transportation as a technology advisor on what at the time were emerging technologies, really in the automotive and highway space. So things like dynamic messaging signs and kind of what we call the more entrenched ITS technologies that helped for efficient movement and safe movement of vehicles, and it was mostly highway-based technology. So technology has evolved, and so have we. So we are a trade association now. We remain, we still do a lot of work and cooperation with the U.S. Department of Transportation, but we represent private sector companies across the board. So tech companies, automotive companies, mobility companies, traffic management companies, et cetera, and the public sector. So departments of transportation at the state and local and regional levels and transit agencies who are all looking to deploy technology in our system to make it safer, greener, and smarter for all. And we actually cross modes. So we have transit agencies as well in our membership, and we have research and academia too, which really bring that, that research on the development of these technologies and feed into the safe deployment in our transportation system.
Amazing. And as CEO and president, what's your day-to-day life?
So my day-to-day life, I'd say, is a lot of speaking, a lot of meeting with member companies, with organizations, with other policymakers in DC area at the national level. I'd say doing a couple things, advocating for why we should be integrating and how we should be integrating these technologies in our system to provide the outcomes that we all need. So, 43,000 deaths on our roadways in the U.S. every year. That is tragic, and we have the tools to change that trend. The transportation sector is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, 29%. Again, we have the tools and technologies to actually make a difference there and reverse that. We lose hundreds of hours every year in congestion, right? There's significant challenges to accessible and equitable mobility in our country right now. And so a lot of my job is meeting with policymakers, meeting with decision makers, talking to our members and others in our community to really educate and advocate for how we can create these roadmaps to incorporate this technology in a safe way in our system to create these better outcomes for people across the country.
Amazing. So you mentioned a few big topics there: safety on our roads, greenhouse gas emissions, equitable access. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of the projects you're involved in right now, maybe to take the first one to try to reduce some of those deaths on our roads?
Sure. So again, since we're at the national level, we're actually vehicle-to-everything technology, or connected vehicle technology, is, I would say, a huge game changer in terms of how we can create safer roadways for all users. So both for drivers and people in the vehicle, but also people outside the vehicles. And so we actually created the first national deployment plan for vehicle-to-everything technologies. We basically created a roadmap and said, here's how we could deploy this on a national scale. We're now working with the U.S. Department of Transportation, the entire industry on the public and private sector sides, partner associations who also share common vision on this to actually create a true national plan for the country. So that's one. That's going to be huge because connectivity in our transportation system is really our best tool to reduce the deaths that we see on our roadways and reduce crashes. So that would be one example of something that we're doing on the safety front. I'd say additionally, we also have, we create different resources for our members. We develop policy. So autonomous vehicles, automated driving, that's another area where we focus. We're creating we've created some resources last year in terms of what are some of the regulatory structures that need to be in place to enable automated driving systems, both on the passenger vehicle side, on the freight side. But we also are looking at, how do we bring the public and private sector together to create successful deployments in that space. So that's another area. And, automated, I think there's there's a lot of people, myself included, who really truly believe that automation can and will increase safety in our system and on the vehicle side in particular. So how we can get that technology rolled out again safely, but at scale is important to us.
And on the greenhouse gas part, how are you looking to green up the automotive ecosystem?
Yeah, so obviously, we support this entire move towards electrification. I think we look at it as there's several different kind of components and steps to the greener side. So we absolutely support this electrification of all modes in the industry, but I think that's sort of step one, right? Because an electric car is only green if the power source is green, right? So we look at it sort of from a decarbonization lens as well, and that's where a lot of the ITS technologies come in too. Because if you can reduce congestion, you can reduce emissions, the emissions that are coming from cars idling. If you can increase the efficiency of your system and the vehicles on your system, you're getting emissions benefits, right? Whether those vehicles, no matter what their power source is, you're also ultimately it's really important to have these connected and ITS-based technologies as everything becomes electrified. The load on the grid is really significant. So ultimately, we're going to be looking at how do we reduce energy usage in transportation, right? It's not just about electrifying; it's also about how do we reduce that energy usage? How do we have more efficient transportation? How do we incorporate these technologies that make public transit more reliable, more convenient, more seamless, so people want to take it, right? So it's looking at a systems approach to this and seeing how we can reduce that carbon footprint and those emissions using multiple different tools.
Mm-hmm. So being based in the States, can you talk about how the US is embracing electric vehicles in comparison to, let's say, other regions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge push in the U.S. right now. There's a lot of there's a lot of funding that's come out of recent bills that were passed to support this transition to electrification. And so I would say, we have right now, you're actually seeing the recent numbers on electric vehicle sales actually were up particularly by the end of the year. So you're seeing increased adoption on the consumer side. From our point, we work a lot with our public sector members, states and others who are getting this funding to deploy the charging stations. It's called the NEVI program, and that's designed to actually create a national network of electric vehicle chargers. That's focused on the highways, but there are other programs that are also focused on urban environments, the fueling infrastructure needs outside of the highways. And then, of course, the transit and, medium, heavy-duty vehicles. There's a lot of, I would say, work, funding, and momentum on that side. But, there's still a lot of, I'd say, problems and challenges to solve to really, get where we want to go and drive adoption. But there's a real, I'd say, laser focus on it in a way that we haven't had before in the U.S.
Okay, great. So that's electric. Now I want to talk about autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the term autonomous driving came out many years ago. Everyone was very excited, and there has been incredible innovation and advancements. But I think because of how it was defined, some people are losing patience and saying, well, we've been talking about autonomous driving for years and I still don't see an autonomous car on our roads. But from my perspective, it's step by step, right? Where do we sit today, and where do we think we'll be in a few years' time?
Well, so I'm not going to make too many predictions because, they're always wrong. But I will say, so what I see from my vantage point is there's a lot of automated vehicle deployments out there right now. Now, you see them in certain areas, they're maybe in constrained environments. They have, particular purviews where they operate. But there's a lot out there. We have a ton of members doing automated shared shuttles. Okay. Services, right? So some are partnering with public transit agencies to provide essentially a more on-demand type of service that's a smaller automated shared vehicle where they're able to serve their community in a different way than a full-size bus, like a full-size city bus. But you're also seeing there's actually something called the Automated Bus Consortium that a lot of states are participating in, where there, there's a lot of momentum, right, in how do we automate full-size buses. Now, on the passenger vehicle side, of course, right, you've seen deployments in cities, and I think, on that front, you have seen some steps forward and some steps back, right? In the past year, and we did see that there were some challenges that the companies encountered, particularly in San Francisco, right, as they were operating. I think part of this goes to really education about what is automated technology, how does it differ from driver assist. There's really a lack of understanding, I think, among the public and among many folks, even policymakers to a degree, of what is automated driving and what are the capabilities and what is driver assist. And so I think that's tied into some of the challenges we've seen, because if you don't understand the differences in what the technology can do and your expectations are different, it can cause, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of confusion. But that's going to, those deployments are going to continue, maybe at a slower pace. I mean, they definitely, we need to ensure safety, and we need to ensure that they're not creating operational issues for, the cities that they're deployed in and the rest of the drivers of the system. And we can do that, but I think that, just takes iterating. It takes time. We really support being able to safely deploy a technology, learn from it, and iterate, right? So we're learning as we go, but making sure that safety is our guiding star. And then you see on the trucking side, actually, you see quite a bit of advancement, I'd say, in the automated trucking space. And there's different business models there too. There's sort of the hub-to-hub, middle mile. There's a lot of different ways that companies are looking at doing automated trucking, but you're seeing a lot of advances in the technology there. So I think you're going to see certain use cases in autonomy accelerating in the next couple of years. I don't think we're not going to be have a fully automated fleet in 10 years. I think it's going to be
but in 20 years?
A slower, maybe. But I'll say this, I think that I think you can get to level 4 automation for sure, which is, within a defined environment. If you're talking about true level 5, it can operate anytime, anywhere, in any condition. That's where I really think that that's going to be hard to do unless our infrastructure becomes as smart as our vehicles. And that's one area of focus for Chace America is how do we actually incentivize this investment in this digital infrastructure layer that is that foundational layer that enables all of these technologies and enables automation and can be a real partner to these automated services that are coming out.
We had the Chief Scientific Officer of Renault on an episode of this podcast recently, and he was talking about autonomous driving, and he said it's all about the use case, the business case to do this. And if everybody's on level 4 autonomy, and we've reduced the 43,000 deaths, and we've greened up the environment, then is there still a business case for level 5? And if there's not a business case, then we don't need to do that. Would you agree with something like that?
Well, I mean, I think that... I think it depends. I mean, I think if you don't have a business case, right, then companies aren't going to invest in that ultimately, right? They're going to invest in where they can actually create a business case for it. So that's definitely possible. I personally think that, I don't know, will we eliminate all deaths, with level 4 automation? I don't know. I actually think connectivity is a really key piece of the puzzle there. And I think that the more that we can be advancing both of those technologies, actually, I think that's going to be that sweet spot where we actually realize more of the benefits, because it's not just the safety. With connectivity, you're actually enabling the emissions reductions and the congestion reductions too. So I think they go hand in hand. And that's not to say that you can't do automation without connectivity. We support both. We do, however, believe that ultimately the safest vehicle is a connected automated vehicle. And I do think, again, I think you get such significant benefits out of connectivity that it's something that we need to be advancing at the same time. There was actually, I was just going to say, there was a recent research that said that 95% of all vehicles by 2030 will be connected. And we're already seeing, incredible advances in the connectivity in vehicles. So I think there's huge opportunities in that space too. And to support automation and these, advanced technologies.
And your role in ITS America is so interesting because it interfaces with the automakers, it interfaces with the technology, providers, it interfaces with the policymakers. Is that right?
Yeah, it interfaces all of them. So and the research community. It's really about how do we actually marry up these different elements of our system, right? Both the vehicles and the users of the system, the infrastructure that we have. And again, what we've really been focused on in the last year is really educating policymakers that infrastructure is not just physical, it's digital. And that we're really increasingly in this world where the digital infrastructure layer is essentially the brains, the operating system, right, for the future transportation system. And you see that with, essentially the digital handshake that's going to have to happen with electric vehicles when you plug into a charging station. You see that with all the connectivity, all the messages, alerts, warnings, information that can be transmitted to cars and to drivers and to users outside of the cars, right? To cyclists, to pedestrians, to others. You see it even with transit in a city. If you have, you can have transit signal priority, right? So your connected traffic signal is digitally, speaking to your bus, and it's giving them the green light in advance, right? So then, you're creating efficiency, you're reducing emissions, you're creating better mobility overall. So how do you marry all those pieces of the system together to really gain the benefits, that I would argue we all want for society?
Talk to me about regulation. What's happening there?
Regulation? Oh, I guess it depends which technology you're talking about. So, there's like right now with automation, there's no federal framework for automation, so it's really state based. And with again with connectivity, there are some regulatory hurdles. There's some spectrum that's dedicated for this purpose, and right now the FCC has to write some final rules, is the best way to put it, about how to operate within that spectrum. And so that's an area that we're really pushing to get that finalized so that both companies, automakers, and the public sector infrastructure owner-operators can start to invest and have certainty and understand what that's going to look like. So I'd say it kind of depends on the technology. And then AI, right? AI is, it's a topic du jour for everyone. Of course, AI has been in our transportation system in many ways for quite some time. Of course, it's a huge, component of autonomy. It's a huge component of so many of these different solution sets out there. And now there's talk both in the U.S. and globally, right, on how do we regulate? Do we regulate AI? How do we regulate AI? And so I think that there's, we actually don't have it's so new, we don't have a policy yet. We're going to be developing a policy on AI, some policy principles, but I think our approach is usually a balanced approach. So how do you create the frameworks to guide, safe deployment of these technologies while also allowing for innovation and not stifling the private sector innovation? That we always try to come to that balanced approach, and so I'm sure we will come up with some kind of balanced policy principles on AI.
Yeah, and just in Europe in the last few months, they released the regulation for artificial intelligence. I think it's the first bill globally for AI, and just like you said, it's really trying to strike a balance between regulating something that could be potentially dangerous, but also not stifling innovation. And it's such a difficult balance to strike. And I think when you speak to startups, oftentimes they're saying it's stifling innovation. If you speak to policymakers, bigger companies, consumers, they want regulation like that, for sure. You talked earlier about equitable access. And I know you've spoken at conferences recently about rural applications for this technology as well. It's not all about cities, it's also about rural. Can you talk about the importance of equitable access to technology and some of those rural applications?
Yeah, so I like to actually start when we talk about equitable access to transportation services, it's really about, when you think about transportation is that nexus that connects us. It connects us to all the components of a thriving life, to jobs, right? To healthcare, to education, to social activities, to essential services. It really is about connecting you to opportunity, right? So, if you don't have equitable access to transportation, you're really limiting potential, you're limiting opportunity. So of course, it depends on your environment, right? So in rural areas, right, we know that there are a lot of communities that have food deserts where they don't have access to fresh food within a reasonable distance. And some of those communities, in some communities, people don't necessarily own a car, right? So there's food deserts, there's medicine, access to medicine and medical care that can be a challenge in some of those areas. And so there are instances, we have members who are using some of these technologies, whether it's usually combinations of an on-demand, integrated payment and on-demand mobility combined sometimes with autonomy in like a shared shuttle, to be able to bring those services to those communities or get those communities to those services, right? You can talk about people who have a disability of some type, right? So whether or not they live in a rural or an urban environment, mobility can be a real challenge for them. And so there's a number of different solution sets within the technology space that can really enable more independent mobility for them. And then the final thing I'll say is I've actually done a lot of speaking and a lot of advocacy on gender equity in transportation. And, how does the transportation serve women? And when you think about how a lot of these systems were built, a lot of systems are really built to bring people from sort of an outlying area into a center city and back. And a lot of times that was done for sort of the male, breadwinner, right? Yep. When you think about the way women travel and women move, women have caregiving responsibilities, women trip chain, women don't take a linear path the way our systems are often set up. And so there's actually been studies and research out there that equates to women pay more for transportation, whether you're paying for safety or convenience, efficiency, whether because you can't take that mode because you have 3 kids in tow. I can't just like jump on a scooter or maybe you can't bring a stroller on a bus or, whatever the barrier is. There's been a lot of research out there that shows that not only do women pay more, but women lose a lot of time. So there's an opportunity cost. And so how do we start to actually think about services that are designed for everybody? And how do we actually take gender differences in how you travel into consideration when you're planning and operating transportation services? So making sure that you're really serving the needs of the people in your community.
I don't know how you keep up with all these things, Laura. There's so many things to think about and consider. Laura, when you think about the automotive space and you think about moving from a software-defined vehicle to an autonomous vehicle, taking into account all the importance of equitable access, I think the two big things that spring to mind, and when I speak to any automaker, two of the first things that comes out of their mouths is always AI, and the second one is sustainability. If we take both of them, I'd love to speak a bit more about that. And speaking to so many different people within this ecosystem, I'm sure they're all thinking about AI. Where are you seeing that technology having its biggest impact right now?
That's a hard question. There's so many good use cases and examples. I think that there could be huge gains in operational efficiency in using. Already you see AI being used, right? Let's even if you're talking about like routing optimization, things like that, right? But I think if you can take that on a larger scale and really apply AI to improve the efficiency, right, in transportation systems. Right now, there's different AI applications in our space, right, that are tied to the coordination and timing of traffic lights, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually is a huge improvement. It not only does it improve safety, because when you're actually creating a system that flows better and you have, less congestion, less stopping going, it increases safety. It reduces emissions. And you're not relying on a human to have to look and say, okay, this happened here, so now I've got to retime. It's doing this all in, nanosecond real time because it can process this data in a way that humans can't. So I think that's a huge benefit. So I think there are huge implications for that. I also think, that one of the areas that is an increasing challenge for our industry is cybersecurity, right? As we include more tech in the system, cybersecurity, and I think AI can be a huge enabler there, right? It can detect anomalies, right? So it can be that first line of defense for cybersecurity. So I think that's going to be a huge gain. And I don't know. There's so many interesting applications. There's so many interesting AI solutions right now they're using at intersections. When you can have AI that is predicting the movements of vehicles and pedestrians and road users, it's able to, if you're able to connect that with your signals, you can avoid crashes, right? So, I think there's just really incredible opportunity there, and we just have to make sure that, again, that we understand the systems, that there's transparency in how they're operating, and that people can trust them, right? That's the thing. If you can trust the AI solutions and gain that public trust, I think that's going to be key.
And is that something that's coming up in most of your conversations?
What I actually see, so again, because I have the public sector and I have the private sector, the private sector is like light years ahead, right, on AI and AI development. And the public sector, I think, is they want a better understanding. Even just kind of, AI, machine learning, neural networks, right? Like, what does it all mean? They want a better understanding. And then they I think where there's a gap is, how does a public sector operator of a system who wants to use an AI technology, how do they evaluate that technology? They're not a technologist, right? So how do they, and that goes back to like the transparency of the system, the explainability of the system. So I think what they are really looking for is more, better ways to evaluate and understand and have that confidence level in these systems, because ultimately the public sector is responsible for the operation of the system. They want to ensure safe operation, and so they need to have that confidence level in the tools that they're deploying to use. And so I think that's what I see a need for education and a need for again, I'm going to say building that trust and transparency in these systems so people do feel confident that you don't have to be an AI expert, or a technologist to be able to have a level of confidence in using that technology.
Okay. And on the second one around sustainability, that's obviously front and center for car companies as they move to decarbonization, as they move to EVs. But there's also a lot of topics about the mining of the resources, the recycling of the batteries. Is enough being done? What more should car companies be doing right now on that front?
For car companies, I think car companies are doing quite a bit on that front. In the U.S., I will say, and we work closely with it's called the Auto Alliance, which is a trade group for autos specifically. We work closely with them as well on many of these issues. But the autos are doing a good job in the U.S. trying to onshore their supply chains, right, and meet the requirements of some of the Build America, Buy America requirements that are a result of these new laws and funding levels, right? And that, so that again, it ties to the batteries, components, the minerals, it ties to all of those elements of that supply chain process. And I think I actually serve on what's called the Electric Vehicle Working Group, which is run by the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And, those are some of the topics that we're considering, is really how do we help support both the auto industry and the public sector who are really trying to make these investments to actually increase adoption of electric vehicles. So I think that, from my perspective, I think the autos are they're making as many investments as they can in this short time frame. Certainly there's more that will have to be done over time. But they've, when you look at how they're transforming their facilities, they're opening new plants, they're again, like I said, they're trying to move all their supply chains onshore. I think they're doing quite a lot.
Okay. 2-part question. If I'm visiting you, and I know you said you don't like to make projections, but if I'm visiting you in 2030 in DC, okay, big city, or if you're visiting me in 2030 in Galway, which is in Ireland, which is, near Galway is quite rural, okay, how different is it going to be in 2030 in a big city like DC, in a rural place like Galway, than it is today?
So my prediction would be, I think you're going to see more, I think you'd see more new technology in the big city, right? I do think you're going to see, and you already do see, like the way, again, with on-demand mobility, let me actually rephrase this and say, a lot of this technology you don't see, right? But it impacts how you access transportation. So I think particularly in in big cities, you're going to see much more integrated payment systems. Hopefully, we'll see some more mobility as a service type of applications that link the different modes together through an app and a seamless payment system. Obviously, you see much more on-demand mobility, right? Everything like that, you can basically order mobility from your phone. I think you will see more potentially automated, shared shuttles, things like that. Might see more of the robo-taxis on the street. But my hope is that we're able to start to see these different pieces really operate more holistically as a system of systems, which is how we always look at transportation, the systems approach. I do think in rural areas you will see, depending on the area, you might see some advances with these services, but again, I think that it's going to be slower to roll out to rural areas. Is my prediction.
Okay, interesting. I can tell you that I spoke to my granny a couple of years ago. She's since passed, but I said, she was 96, I think. I said, Granny, what do you think about all these autonomous cars? She said, I see them going up and down this road every day. She definitely doesn't.
She doesn't.
But very good. To get to that future in 2030, are there blockers? Are there challenges that need to be resolved in the meantime? Is it transmission rates? Is it OTA? What do people need to work on between now and then in order to achieve that future?
So again, I'm coming from the national perspective. So what I would say is, and I think we've seen this in connectivity. I think we've seen this in automation. So I think what we really need are national frameworks and roadmaps to guide this technology, because what that does is it gives the private sector, it sends a signal to the whole industry. So to the private sector, it sends a signal, yes, this is the future we see, so you should make that investment. And to the public sector, it sends a signal, yes, you should be upgrading your systems and investing in these different technologies because, again, this is the future we see. And, you saw that in the U.S., you saw that with electrification. Like, you saw when President Biden was, even before he was elected, telegraphing electrification, telegraphing this need to really, move to a clean energy economy. And then you saw the passage of several bills in Congress to provide that funding and that strategic direction. And you saw the private sector making those investments, right? So you saw auto companies before the bills were, you saw them making commitments to turn over their fleet. And that doesn't happen as quickly if you don't have that vision at the top. I think it happens in a much more fragmented path. And I think that's what we've seen to some degree with both connectivity and automation, is we've seen advances, but in very fragmented ways, where you don't have that national vision saying this is the future we want to see. And, this is kind of I'm not talking about prescriptive. I'm talking about a framework and a roadmap so that everybody, whether you're a developer of a technology or a deployer of the technology, have that confidence to invest that, yes, this is going to be the future. If I invest in this now, it's not going to be obsolete in 5 years, right? So I think that's important.
Yeah. And of course, this whole discussion, we spoke about cars, we're speaking about driving, but we're really speaking about life, right? Driving is such a core element of our life. We're speaking about smarter cities. We're speaking about how we will live. And driving is such a core element of that. Mm-hmm. Such an exciting future.
Yeah, yeah.
Laura Chace, thank you so much.
Safer.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.